I am coming for you. I'm going to tell you the story. Hold on a minute. There you go. Of Chuckles. There you go. Chuckles the Clown. You see, Chuckles the Clown lived in the 1930s during the Great Depression. But to be fair, Chuckles was not a very good clown. But he knew that if he showed up in Florida in late February, all the big circuses would have hired all the good clowns, and he would be hired by one of the leftovers, because Chuckles was a leftover himself. So Chuckles showed up in Florida, and sure enough, he got a job. But then the boss made him mad. And you don't want to make Chuckles mad. He put 3 roustabouts, the men that put up the tents, in the train car with Chuckles. And Chuckles looked at the young man and said, "Don't mess with me or I'll kill you all." And the young men, when they were putting on a show, slept under the train car. So they could avoid Chuckles. But things went okay. When they started their tour of the Southeast across southern Georgia, Alabama, the first month, the shows were okay. Chuckles even did an okay job. But the big problem for everyone is they didn't make enough money to buy enough food. And every night the cast and crew would gather around the table and they would be served a bowl of stagnant soup with rotten carrots and onions and potatoes and occasionally a chunk of meat that you didn't ask where it came from. But when they finished eating, they would all still be starving. But after that first month, they started to notice that Chuckles never came to dinner. And they finally saw where he was. He was always sitting over near his train car, and he would make a makeshift table, and sitting in front of him was a plate of fresh, juicy chunks of meat. And he would gnaw on it like an animal. And if anybody came up to him and asked where it came from, "Leave it alone, it's mine!" And they would run away fast. But then the manager one day was looking for the 3 roustabouts that shared the train car with Chuckles. And he asked where they had went, and nobody had seen them in days. And Chuckles said, "I don't know where they went, leave me alone." And nobody in the cast and crew saw them. And that's when the rumors started. Where did Chuckles get all that meat? Where did those boys go? And then it got even weirder. As they passed through small towns, a day or two later, sheriffs would show up with a picture of a young teenage boy and say, "This boy said he was running away to join the circus. Did anybody see him?" Everybody would say no when they went and asked Chuckles, "I haven't seen him. I hate boys. Keep him out of my sight." And after 2 months, everybody in the cast and crew was losing weight by the day, except Chuckles. Chuckles was downright fat. He had gained at least 50 pounds in the 2 months they had been on the road. Nobody should gain weight during a depression. And finally, do you realize the microphone picks up everything? Yeah. Don't make me go back and listen to who's talking when they're not supposed to be. Now, the strong man and a roustabout had to know. The rumors were getting stronger and stronger about the missing boys, but they didn't have any proof or know what was going on. So the roustabout and the strong man decided one day when they didn't have a show, they would sleep all day and follow Chuckles that night and see if he was doing anything they were missing. That night, right at dusk, they hid in the woods looking toward Chuckles' train car. And at about 2 in the morning, Chuckles climbed out of his car and he walked toward the woods. And he reached in and he picked up a sack. And he struggled. It looked very heavy. And he threw it into the train car. When he did, a drip of something hit the ground. And Chuckles climbed in and closed the door. The strong man walked over and ran his finger through the liquid blood. But it could still be an animal. Maybe it's not. But that bag looks so heavy. But they couldn't go to the authorities. If they confronted Chuckles, he might kill them all. The authorities would think if they said the clown's eating people, he lost his mind. So they just decided to keep watching it. 2 hours later, the train car door opened again, and Chuckles jumped out and threw the sack over his shoulder, only this time it looked very light. He walked toward where the lions and the tigers were. And these lions and tigers were as shabby as the rest of their circus, and they were starving too. Chuckles opened the sack and reached in and took out bones and started throwing them in the cage. The lions and the tigers tore the bones apart in seconds. There was nothing but dust, and still the strong man had doubts. Maybe it's just an animal. But the clincher was when Chuckles lifted a human skull out of the sack, and he tossed it to the lion, and the lion caught it in midair and crushed it like an eggshell. And within moments, there was nothing but dust left. As Chuckles walked back across the circus ground, he dropped the sack into the communal fire, and it burned quickly. Chuckles climbed into his car and presumably went to sleep. The strong man and the roustabout ran back to their tent, shaken with fear, because now they knew the whole truth. And the next morning they went and they told all the other cast and crew what they had seen. But they had a huge problem. There was no evidence. The lions and the tigers ate all the bones. The sack burned up in the fire, and Chuckles ate all the meat. Nobody would ever believe this. But then the smallest man among them, a little trapeze artist who was only about 5'2", but he had lost about half of his body weight, heard his own stomach grumble. And he leaned over to the person next to him and said, "I have a wonderful, terrible, perfect idea." And one by one, they whispered all the way around the table, everyone afraid to say it out loud. But when they got back to the trapeze artist, everybody looked and nodded. That night, Chuckles put on the best show of his life. He had them rolling in the aisles and laughing. They were dancing all over the seats. It was the greatest show ever for Chuckles the Clown. And the rest of the cast and crew were so caught up in the moment, they put on their best performance as well. And that night, Chuckles strutted across the stage and took his bows. And then he walked out of the tent. And no one ever saw Chuckles again. The next day, the manager came to find Chuckles. He looked everywhere and couldn't find him at all. He had sold nearly twice as many tickets as usual. Everybody had heard about the show the night before, and they were so excited that they were buying tickets left and right. They wanted to see this wild clown. The manager opened the car door, stepped inside, but all he found was a ratty outfit, an old makeup kit, a bunch of junk scattered on the floor. He went and asked the rest of the cast and crew. He said, "I've got to have a clown today. We've got a huge matinee show." And everybody shook their head. "Oh, no. Maybe his show was so good last night, he decided it was the best he could ever do, and he retired. Maybe he went to another circus. Maybe he quit and just ran away. Nobody in the cast and crew said they had seen Chuckles at all. That day's show, the manager had to walk out and tell the crowd there would be no clown. Half of them walked out and demanded their money back. The rest of the show was a disaster. Everyone in the cast made mistakes. The crew had things in the wrong places and caused all kind of accidents. Luckily, no one got seriously hurt, but everybody's mind was somewhere else. And finally, it was over. The disgruntled audience stormed out. The cast and crew, however, now were ecstatic. They all ran back to the dinner table because now at every single place was a big plate of juicy, fresh chunks of meat. And they all sat down and started to devour the meat. And after about 10 minutes, they cleared the table. And every one of them was more stuffed than they had been in 2 years or more. And they all looked up and chuckled. Now, before you leave today, you can